And a very warm welcome back to your latest aviation news recap, covering stories that didn't get their own separate video, but ones I think you'll find pretty interesting to say the least. Stay tuned for coverage on WestJet, Korean Air, Singapore Airlines, and a whole lot more. We're beginning today's coverage with Norse Atlantic Airways, which have announced that they're expanding their route network. For the upcoming summer season of 2023, they'll launch London Gatwick to Orlando and Fort Lauderdale. Orlando flights will begin on the 25th of May, while one day later, on the 26th of May, the airline will begin service to Fort Lauderdale from, once again, London Gatwick. These services will join the current 787 flight from London to New York, which began in August of 2022. Norse Atlantic forecasts a busy summer season and wants to bring customers value by offering meaningful and also impactful services. Since joining the aviation industry, the airline has operated exclusively with the Boeing 787. Instead of, say, operating a domestic or European network with smaller aircraft, the airline specializes solely in transatlantic flights with its 787s for low prices. Many analysts have highlighted how Norse Atlantic not having a domestic or European market as something to fall back on could impact their long-term feasibility in the industry. The business model has notoriously been hard to pull off for the long term. For example, the routes Norse have launched and are looking to begin were a pivotal catalyst to the undoing of Norwegian, an airline that no longer flies wide-body aircraft. Coincidentally, many label Norse as Norwegian 2.0 with a business model that is very similar, even down to the newly announced routes. The chief executive officer at London Gatwick highlighted how, as the destinations selected by Norse Atlantic are excellent for families, and they're being launched in the summer, it is a match made in heaven. With that being said, Norse's model and network have their critics, and it's still a model that presents risks and uncertainties when the winter season comes and demand plummets. As a result, the airline has and continues to explore alternative uses for their 787s as they reduce their network during the winter and look to subsequently ramp that up in the summer months. Moving on to Canadian airline WestJet, which sees Western Canada remain of heightened focus as they look to expand for the months ahead. Edmonton is WestJet's city of focus, with increased connectivity for transborder services. A new non-stop service to Minneapolis and Seattle, alongside Washington, have been announced. These flights will form a fundamental part of its route network for the summer of 2023. Calgary, Vancouver, and Edmonton are all cities that have seen greater importance placed on them in recent times at WestJet. However, today's focus is on Edmonton. The city will see a 50% increase in services from WestJet for this upcoming summer season, and these figures are in comparison to the same period for 2022's season. The expansion announcement out of Edmonton is the largest one serving the city in the company's history, and it's highlighting that commitment furthermore to Western Canada. Alberta will see significant growth with new flights and already existing announcements. Frequencies to cities are as follows: Minneapolis, 5 times weekly; Seattle, 5 times weekly; Charlottetown, 1 times weekly; Moncton, 2 times weekly; London, 2 times weekly; Ottawa, 6 times weekly; and Montreal, 2 times weekly, with a couple of other cities being focused on there, with also 2 times weekly services. Since our first day of operation in February 1996 to reaffirming our commitment to the city and a region almost exactly 27 years ago, Edmonton is an integral part of WestJet's beginnings and our future. As WestJet continues to own our position as the undisputed home team carrier of Western Canada, I am grateful to be celebrating our renewed focus on Edmonton alongside our valued partners, as we take strides to energize the city's two-way tourism opportunities and bolster its accessibility. These comments from the WestJet Chief Executive Officer. Now on to our next topic of the day, and that's centered around Korean Air and Brisbane, with Queensland's tourism industry continuing to see a boost as the airport announces Korean Air will fly to Brisbane in April from Seoul. The flight will operate 5 times weekly and add 89,000 seats each respective year. In addition, it will support 1,230 direct and indirect jobs in Queensland. This year will mark 30 years, actually, since Korean Air first started flying to Brisbane, a fun fact from the Executive General Manager of Aviation at the Brisbane Airport Corporation. Sadly, though, the flights were halted due to the pandemic, so it's great to see them back permanently. Korean Air relaunching services from Seoul into Brisbane is part of broader speculation that the carrier is plotting a more considerable expansion into Australia. Melbourne remains a heavily rumoured destination the airline may look to relaunch to. Its return has been long overdue since its departure from the city some time ago. However, the announcement centering around Brisbane and wider Queensland is part of the first anniversary of the AAIF. This is Queensland's Attracting Aviation Investment Fund, described as a war chest of $200 million that has been provided to 4 major airports in the state, including Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, and finally Cairns. Thus far, the fund has established a host of new routes, seen airlines return following the pandemic, and done much more for the Queensland aviation sector. Now, let's look at Singapore Airlines and Vietnam Airlines, which have both announced plans to strengthen their existing partnership, and comes following the signing of an MOU. The 2 airlines are expected to explore the many possible opportunities to enter into more code-sharing agreements, with the sole ambition of connecting Vietnam and Singapore better. However, while the airline explores code sharing between the 2 countries, there is also the expectation that this will include the broader carrier's international networks. Code share agreements offer fantastic opportunities and value to customers that are flying the respective airlines. Better flexibility, routes, connectivity, and more are all put forward once these airlines sign agreements. While the 2 major international airlines will expand their partnership, this has been a long-standing one that has stretched over 20 years. And as restrictions ease in the region, they're excited at what the future will bring. Vietnam Airlines, per Cirium data, has 89 aircraft in service, with an average age of 8.6 years. Over at Singapore Airlines, they have a much larger fleet, with 134 total aircraft in service, averaging a younger age of 6.7 years. Their largest fleet type is the Airbus A350, with a total of 60. That's going to conclude today's aviation news recap. As I always say, if you have any thoughts on the stories that were covered in this video, you can let me know down below in the comments. Thank you so very much for your support. I do greatly appreciate it. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you next time here on the channel for lots more aviation news coverage.